good afternoon, or I guess good morning, depending on where you're logging in from. Thank you very much for joining this Babel PR webinar today. So we're looking good on numbers, so I'm just going to crack on with some brief introductions. So for those of you that don't know me, my name's Paul Campbell. I'm a director here at Babel PR, and we are a B2B telecoms and technology PR agency. And I personally oversee a number of the clients that fall within our telecoms portfolio. And it's great to see a lot of you here today. So telecoms is a sector that I've had a hand in for probably about a decade now, but that's nothing compared to our guest today. So I'm very pleased to be joined by Ray Le Maistre, the Editorial Director at Telecom TV. And Ray has worked as a telecoms journalist for, I think, about 25 years. And I expect that most of you will have probably had the pleasure of working with Ray in some capacity, either during his recent time at Telecom TV or during the 18 years that he spent at Light Reading. So he requires very little introduction. So Ray, thank you very much for your time and joining me on this discussion today.
My pleasure. Thanks for the introduction and making me feel as young as I look. And with the grey hair and everything. And as you can see, I've chosen to present myself as being the inside of a crunchy bar today. This is one of the backdrops we used at one of our Telecom TV sessions towards the end of last year and was a big hit. So
it's making me feel festive again.
Yeah.
Brilliant. So during the session, I'm going to be getting Ray's views on some of the key kind of telecoms trends that he thinks will be driving the media agenda this year. I think we'll also touch on some issues like the postponement of Mobile World Congress Barcelona to June this year, and how that will impact the focus of the media, particularly in Q1. Please note that we're going to be leaving questions from the audience until the end of the session. So if there's anything you want to ask, please just kind of jot it down and we'll make sure we leave plenty of time for everyone to ask their questions at the end. We'll aim to be wrapped up, I'd say, in about kind of 30 to 45 minutes, but Ray has kindly told me that he's got a bit of flexibility to ensure that we can get through everyone's questions if necessary. So we can stay on if people have burning questions they want to ask. So we'll make sure we get through everything that people want to ask him today. And one last thing, if you do want to tweet about this event, we have set up a hashtag, hashtag Babel Talks Telco, and my colleague is going to post that in the chat box in a second, so you can all see it. Excellent. Well, let's get cracking with the Q&A, Ray. So, Ray, I know most people are very keen to see the back of 2020, but before we move a discussion into 2021. I just wanted to see if you had one main takeaway from 2020 in telecoms that you'd like to share with us. Was there a particular trend that stood out for you this year?
I think not so much a trend as a realization of how important and how resilient the communications services and networking sector is. I think 3 or 5 years ago, the events of 2020 might have brought a lot of communications networks to their knees. But because of the developments in networking technology, but particularly in the softwareization of communications systems and networks, they were able to adapt an awful lot quicker to the changing working environments, and I think that really showed last year. And I think actually that has given this industry a lot more confidence in what it can achieve and what the pivotal role it plays in every single industry vertical there is. So I think that would be the key takeaway.
Yeah, absolutely right. I think the general perception was that the networks held up very well. So yeah, that's great. Thanks, Ray. That was 2020. So looking ahead, I mean, Ray, what do you think are the big issues in telecoms that you feel will steal the headlines this year?
So I'm going to answer that in terms of what I think should be in the headlines rather than what will steal the headlines. I think undoubtedly we will continue to see, the 5G being the most used individual term this year, But I think what is very important for the industry is to move this on from 5G is launching, 5G is here, and to start to branch that out into what 5G actually means for users, and particularly for enterprise users. I think we are starting to see some of that right now in terms of communications around the 5G edge related strategies and the development of specific enterprise services there. But that's just one example. And I think that what we need to see, what needs to be in the headlines this year, are more use cases and solid examples of 5G actually differentiate the industry, differentiating what 5G can deliver compared to what could only be delivered with 4G or with other technologies. I think the other thing that's key for the industry to be talking about and communicating is how the industry is changing in the way it operates. I guess that comes under the general term as cultural transformation, how companies are changing their working practices, their partnerships, their go-to-market strategies. And this is anything from telecom operators partnering with hyperscalers. I think how they work with each other, how telcos are sharing assets. I think the shared infrastructure is going to continue to be a very big deal and needs to be in the headlines this year. Investment strategies, and I think clear communication of where investments are going, rather than just saying we are putting 20 billion into our network this year. You know, what does that actually mean? How much of that is going into the incredibly important fixed access infrastructure that is enabling the work from home strategies of companies, which of course will be ongoing, I think, in 2021 and beyond. And I think then the other two things I would call out is security, network security in the communications industry, still very much almost a second tier topic, whereas it really needs to be right up there with 5G and of course an open networking, which I think we'll get to a bit more to in a moment. But also I think the business diversification, incredibly important, particularly for the telecom operators. We're starting to see operators branching beyond their traditional business areas. One example would be Orange with banking. Telstra is talking about reselling renewable energy to its consumers. SK Telecom is becoming is going into partnership with Amazon to be a deliverer of Amazon products, which is something I don't think anybody would have considered a couple of years ago. And I think these diversification strategies are incredibly important, particularly to the operators, but I think this is something also that the supply side would probably look to replicate as well.
Brilliant, thanks, Ray. All really interesting points. And I think, you know, another one of the big trends, I think, within the industry, and certainly one that we've seen Telecom TV cover quite a bit, has been the move to more open and software-centric networks through initiatives like Open RAN and O-RAN. So how do you see these initiatives progressing and gaining further momentum this year?
Well, I think the momentum is only going to increase. I think, you know, you could get that sense at the end of 2019 that this wasn't just an exercise, something that was just happening amongst the people that attended conferences or were involved in working parties at TIP and other development organizations. This is now front and center in the strategies of the largest tier 1 operators in the world, and it's not going to go back. So Open RAN, it is a case of when, not if. I think, you know, there's still a lot of big questions here. You know, what percentage of spend or network rollout will be using open disaggregated systems? that is still a big unknown for absolutely everybody in the industry. But there's no doubt that this is now definitely a major trend with strategic push behind it, investment behind it, and consequently we are going to see new entrants in the market as a result, which is always good to see. But we also need to see a realignment and a communication of evolved strategies from existing players to reflect this, and we are seeing that, of course. You know, I think it's fair to call out amongst the big network equipment providers. You know, Nokia has been on the Open RAN bandwagon is a bit of a pejorative term, but I'm going to use it on that bandwagon, as Telecom TV is, because it's important. Been on it for a couple of years, and I think will benefit as a result of having putting time, energy, and resource into it. And I expect others to follow. But I think what's going to be most interesting is the emergence of smaller, nimble companies that can play a role as partners and deliver specific expertise to the operators, but also to the systems integrators and large vendors that are going to bring the various parts together to build these new kinds of networks. And I think, you know, having mentioned earlier on the cultural transformation in the industry, I think this is definitely going to drive some of that, because we are going to see the introduction of new ways of working within the industry, all the way from, I mean, I wrote a couple of months ago how Dish Network in the US is using a process called Chaos Monkey, which Netflix came up with as a way to test its networks on the fly. And I think it's these kind of processes that sound, you know, so normal to, you know, new age technology companies that are anathema to the operating the ways that traditional telecom operators work. But I think we're going to see that kind of thing come out and evolve during the year, and I think these are the things that we need to be focusing on, because these are the things that are going to change the way that the industry works.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, are there any other issues that you'd like to hear companies coming out and being a bit more vocal about in the media, and sending you commentary on, you know, either this quarter and throughout the rest of the year as well?
Well, I think, you know, I could rattle off a long list of topics, but I think, you know, it's not that there are any, you know, that there's a set of topics that are interesting and then a whole load of topics that aren't interesting. I think, you know, everything has its place, even the things that seem the most, what might seem on the surface, the most dull and boring parts of the industry are very often the most important. And I think a classic example here would be something like energy efficiency, power supply. You know, this is the topic of sustainability. Is we have a specific channel for this on Telecom TV, and for a reason. I think this is becoming a really big deal in the strategies of all large companies in all verticals. But it's incredibly important, especially with some of the bullshit you hear around the world around 5G, and hence the burning of masts and so on and so forth. You know, that 5G is going to burn up the earth or do God knows whatever. But there are dangers with the rollout of much more dense networks, that we do end up actually consuming more power, even when systems might be more power efficient per customer reached, etc., etc. And I think that developments on things like power efficiency, energy efficiency are incredibly important, but might seem really hard to communicate in an interesting way. But actually, these kind of things are absolutely critical. And I think anybody that has something that can move the needle in the industry, you know, should be taking this to market. But the things I think that are absolutely important are, you know, have a case study, have some very clear examples of how these things are used, even if it's in another industry. Have clear product strategies, make sure you're not caught up in the kind of jargon that somebody, and this is particularly relevant for the telecoms industry. You know, nowadays, developments in the telecom industry and even in radio access networks, large enterprises are now finding themselves in need of needing to understand radio access networks, mobile network infrastructure, because their company might have just acquired a CBRS license in North America and might be considering building a private network. Now, they're going to need to find out about this stuff. And if they go to the industry and find that it's talking in a completely different language that they don't understand, that is of no use to anybody. So I think using very clear communication, it sounds so obvious, but I get press releases every day, and I've been covering this industry for 25 years, and sometimes I do not know what the hell they are talking about, and I just put them aside. And if I'm putting them aside, you can be damn sure that potential customers are doing the same. So user examples, clear communication, very clear and detailed product specifications or links to, I think, are very important. And having any third-party commentary, you know, bringing in an analyst comment, or having, you know, that customer saying something that sounds like it might be real, that they might actually have said it. These kind of things are very important for the credibility of messages going out to the market. And I think that, you know, that applies across the board to all the topics I've mentioned so far.
Brilliant. Thanks, Ray. That was really useful. I mean, are there any topics that you're slightly fatigued of hearing about now? That, you know, you get sent a lot of commentary about, and you'd like to see the discussion move on?
You know, not really. There isn't anything that I'm bored of in terms of a topic, but I am bored in just being, you know, fed, you know, 500 words of nothing. I'd rather have 50 words of something, and you know, I'm quite happy to receive it via any channel. So I think, you know, somebody reaching out, and I think this applies to anybody in the B2B media, you know, taking LinkedIn as an example. If you're a B2B journalist and you're not on LinkedIn, go and find another job. If you're on LinkedIn, then for somebody to just, you know, drop you a link and say, I think this would be of interest to you because I know you're covering this topic, and providing a link, that is as good or better indeed, I think, than sending a long email that is, you know, a press release or a white paper. So I think about, you know, using efficient ways and digital ways to communicate. You know, I'm sure everybody's email is out of control. So I think I'm not bored of topics. I'm bored of I'm bored of being presented with ideas and pictures that I don't understand and that don't have any useful information in them. That's what I would say I'd be bored of.
Brilliant. Yeah, I have noticed, Ray, that you are particularly active on LinkedIn, and it is good to hear that you are receptive to receiving, you know, messages on LinkedIn and across social media. And I guess it's a way for people to, I guess, continue some of those discussions that you start on those platforms and some of the news stories that you post about. So you would encourage companies to, you know, to comment on those stories, and also, I guess, directly message you as well if they want to pitch you an idea.
Very much so. I think LinkedIn, you know, currently it's not only the platform where most of the people in this industry will be active, but you know, fingers crossed, it continues to be unsullied by the kind of you know, trash talk that you see on other social media channels. You know, you still get stuff that's not interesting, and you still get a lot of kind of, you know, unwanted pictures, but at least it's more focused, and you can pretty much tell where stuff is coming from. So
great. So Ryan, I think you made a very good point at the beginning of the call that networks have held up very well through the pandemic, but I think it's clear that the industry is going to have to continue to adapt to the long-term changes that are being forced by the pandemic, such as remote learning and remote working. However, is there any indication that your readers or your colleagues and other journalists are getting slightly slightly bored of COVID-focused content, or is there still, I guess, a very real need for that conversation to continue and for companies to talk about how they are kind of supporting the changes that are being forced by the pandemic at the moment?
Yeah, no, I think it's quite the opposite. I think that whenever there is something pertinent to say about, how is the current situation impacting strategies, how are companies dealing with this? We find this every day. I think, as we speak, one of my colleagues is publishing an article about a whole load of new services that are coming out focused at enterprises that have more distributed workforces now. This isn't new, but this is happening more and more. And I think, today's example was coming from Colt Technologies, which is obviously very well known for its enterprise services. So they're taking their secure managed voice services a step further. And I think these kind of developments, which may have been accelerated or might have been, slightly changed or altered by the current working conditions. These are of interest, and we see that in our statistics as well. People are definitely interested in this topic still. Nobody wants to. I think people are done with, COVID-19 has had an impact on the industry. Yes, we know that. What is now happening as a result? How are investments, strategies changing as a result, and how can the communications industry make lives easier and secure their own businesses as a result of adapting to that? Because there's no doubt about it, this industry, along with pharmaceuticals, are the industries that can keep industry going, I think, in 2021 as well as 2020.
Yeah, it's very fair to say. And I guess in light of the very real challenge of COVID-19 at the moment, I mean, do you think that companies should still be pitching future-gazing articles and thought leadership? So, is now a good time to be talking about 6G, for example, when we're kind of, really still just trying to battle with the challenges here and now?
No, I think absolutely. Nothing's off the table. And I certainly would say that, there shouldn't be a halt on anything. In fact, I think there should be an acceleration of R&D into what can come next, what can help move this industry on. I think that's actually more important than ever. And obviously at the moment, 6G is very much a kind of a research exercise. What's being talked about now in terms of 6G might not come to fruition in 5-10 years time, but some of it will, and some of it will spark other ideas, and it might spark new investment cycles, and it might spark the formation of new startups, which of course now it's easier now to have a 2-person startup that can develop software that becomes absolutely critical to making next generation chips enable 6G communications. So I think, I want to hear more about 6G. I don't want to hear about 7G at the moment. And I think the cable industry might have got ahead of itself by using the term 10G to talk about some of its strategies. But 6G, absolutely, let's hear about it.
Brilliant, that's great to hear. So I want to just move on to Mobile World Congress now. And the reason for that is that I know the event has always been a mainstay for the telecoms industry and for many companies within the industry. And those companies often, they build marketing programs around the event in Q1, which often set them up for the rest of the year. So how do you feel that the Mobile World Congress Barcelona's shift to June will impact the industry this year and particularly this quarter?
Well, I think that I think I can, at the moment, I can use Telecom TV's experience in that we are seeing a lot more engagement of companies wanting to do and planning stuff now that may come to market in April and May ahead of that proposed June date, but also planning on the stuff that they had set up and wanted to talk about in Q1, they don't want to hold on to June for it. They want to find a way to get it to market, you know, because by June they'll have the next step. So I think that, you know, that shift has obviously had a great, will have a great impact on the way companies plan their year, but I don't see it holding too much up, because, you know, if you hold on to something, it might not be so new by the time you get to June as it might have been at the end of February. And also, I think, you know, a lot of companies are still actually catching up with the impact of last year and how that bumped things on. And certainly what the Telecom TV team, and I'm sure this is the same at all the other telecoms publications, are having discussions with companies now about what they can talk about ahead of MWC and in Q1, and how they can get that messaging to market, what needs to be talked about right now, and what's important to the industry. Because of course the big question as well with MWC is, if it does go ahead in June, you know, to what you know, what kind of scale will it be at? How many people will attend? You know, I know it's an incredibly important show, and hopefully come 2022 it might be back to some kind of scale of where it was, but I'm sure 2021 it won't be. And again, that will be another year of missing out on those back-to-back customer meetings, which of course are absolutely vital for every company in this industry. And you cannot replicate that. In any other, you can't replicate it exactly. So you have to do something else to fill in. And obviously you can have customer meetings, but you will not meet the friend of the customer who might become the new customer. That's what you cannot get at the moment. So that makes it even more important now to clearly communicate roadmaps and strategies on what companies have to offer to the market, and to do it and to do it now and not hold on to it, because, you know, I think as last year showed, even with the disruption of 2020, this industry moved at a pace like I've never seen. You know, changes in technology capabilities and company strategies were happening on a quarter-by-quarter basis, not a year-by-year basis. And that's not going to get any slower. That's only going to accelerate. So I think, you know, some really finessed marketing strategies are going to be needed for 2021. And I don't think anybody can bet on MWC happening in any way, shape or form that it might have done in the past. I think that's going to be more 2022. And you know, if it does happen, if 90,000 people turn up in Barcelona in June at MWC, I, along with everybody else, will be very happy to see that, because that will mean that the world will be a much safer place to be in. So I hope it happens, but I honestly don't think it will.
Absolutely. And of course, you know, events like Mobile World Congress also provide a platform for companies to meet with journalists like yourselves.
Yeah.
I mean, do you have any advice for companies about how they can, you know, try and get that face time with journalists like yourself in lieu of the events not taking place at the beginning of the year?
Well, I think, you know, I think it's just a reiteration of what I mentioned earlier. I think using digital channels of communication, you know, weirdly, I think it's, you know, the combination I like to see. Email is very useful, but I will always pick up the phone. If somebody calls me, I'm going to answer it. And I'm not going to put the phone down just because somebody says, I think I've got a news story for you. I want to hear it. So I think, you know, using the phone and making that outreach. Not every journalist, of course, you know, is at home to that. But I know plenty that are. It's not just myself. So using the phone, using LinkedIn, I think is very useful. But what is absolutely critical here is to be able to bring useful information, you know, as the starting point, as the launch for a further conversation. And if somebody, you know, there's three key things in this industry, and that's people, technology, and money. And anybody that will come with a pitch that gives details of all three is definitely going to get a briefing. So
Brilliant.
A high-level person who can actually talk about the strategy, who can talk about money and investments and potential return on investments, and talk about technology strategy in a detailed and an easy to communicate way. I think, you know, if you've got that in the bag, then you're going to get briefings and you're going to get coverage.
I mean, do you have a requirement, Ray, for, you know, how long you need in advance of a new story breaking to receive all that information to write a story?
No, it can be on the day. It just needs to be all there in a package and ready.
Right.
You know, answering a question saying, I think I can get hold of somebody in a couple of days who might be able to provide me with the answer isn't a great deal of help these days, I have to say. So come prepared, I would say.
Fantastic. Brilliant. And, you know, it's very clear that a lot of publications in the media industry are suffering the same squeezes that almost every industry has as a result of the pandemic. And from chatting to you earlier, Ray, it's great that Telecom TV is doing well. I mean, do you have any other tips for companies that are looking to get on the radar of journalists like yourself at a time where editorial teams are slightly squeezed?
Not much more than what I've been than what I've said, really. You know, I think just coming with trying to attract people's attention with very little detail and a promise of having something unique for the market, but without any backup detail, or promising, you know, we had an example of this yesterday where the CEO of a company was promised for comment, and we said, absolutely, get them on the phone, to find out that the CEO wasn't available at all. You know, that is an absolute no-go. You know, it's incredibly important, you know, as much as it's important from our side of the fence, to live up to expectations and to deliver on what we're supposed to deliver. It's very much a two-way street. Making empty promises is a road to nowhere, absolutely. But I think, you know, like I said, people, technology, money, bringing user examples, having data on hand, and, you know, having you know, even video resources that, you know, everybody uses video these days. Everybody wants images. A lot of people, you know, infographics might be a term from 10 years ago, but infographics hold a lot of data, and being able to provide even a snippet of the kind of information that used to be provided in infographics, or bring infographics back. It's all about, it's not really about it's about the quality of the information and whether it's going to be useful to the person that will ultimately consume it. The way I always look at it is, am I doing something that will help somebody in this industry do their job better? That's how I look at it. And I think that, you know, if that can start at the planning stages for companies that want to talk to us or any other telecoms journalists to get a story or message out to market, you know, starting at that point might help to bring together the pitch that might be that might actually resonate with a telecoms journalist.
Brilliant. And so how are you kind of balancing your editorial between news and thought leadership at the moment? Has that changed over the past year? Well,
I mean, not really. I think we, you know, in our news coverage, we try and provide some kind of insight, whether it's our own when we feel that we can provide it, or reaching out to industry experts to provide it at the same time. I think, you know, adding a little bit more of a personal take on LinkedIn, I think, is more appropriate, and that's what I tend to do. But I think it's, you know, news in itself, when I think it's when it is relevant and when it actually will be of interest to somebody in the industry. I think just putting out the news on the right kind of topics in the right kind of way, and providing, and what we try to do as well is provide those links within our coverage to other resources that will help people get the information that can be useful. You know, is that a white paper on a company's website? Is that an analyst report? Is that you know, a Reuters story, or even an article written by what some people might deem as a rival to Telecom TV? I would quite happily link to, you know, a light reading article, a mobile network article. You know, the team from Mobile Live at the GSMA. It's all about providing people with what is useful to them. That is the key to getting people to coming back and reading what you put out. And yes, Telecom TV did have a good year last year, but I think that's because I think we hit on the right topics. Open RAN was a massive topic last year that we focused on, and we got an awful lot of traction around that topic, and we ran a very successful digital summit around that topic. But you know, there's lots going on out there in the industry, and there's lots of different ways of presenting it. And I think, you know, having the video platform that Telecom TV had developed in the past 5 years held us in good stead last year, because that was the kind of digital platform that people needed to get to market, and still will do in 2021. And I think, you know, where we try to provide thought leadership to the industry is by talking to the right people and asking them the right questions and getting them to provide that thought leadership through Telecom TV.
Brilliant, thanks, Ray. Was there anything else you wanted to add? I guess maybe in terms of specific opportunities that Telecom TV is offering to companies at the moment to help them generate visibility before we move on to the Q&A.
Yeah, I mean, sure. I mean, like I said, you know, we've been talking for a while to a bunch of companies about how they can get, you know, present themselves to the market. And obviously, you know, my job is essentially as a journalist, but also, of course, I host discussions with sponsors of Telecom TV as well. So obviously I'm engaging with those companies on that level as well. So we're already seeing a lot of activity around companies wanting to put together programs of information that they can take to market, using a mix of video interviews and video discussions. Telecom TV normally in itself would be doing its own main event of the year in the May timeframe, which is the DSP Leaders World Forum. We've actually brought that back to March now, because we don't want to be too close to where MWC is, and that's the reason we've changed it. You know, anybody who puts anything too close to the beginning of June, if MWC exists even on a small in a small way, 20,000 people, 10,000 people, that's still a relevant show that there's going to be a lot of attention and a lot of focus on. So we've shifted our DSP Leaders World Forum event back to March. That is very much an opportunity for companies to get involved and be talking about topics such as open networking and cultural transformation, you know, sustainability. You know, that really is a big topic that's impacting a lot of companies and their strategies. And of course, the evil, you know, I think everybody in this industry is running a business, and they need to get a return on investment. And I mentioned earlier on how important it is, the diversification of business. But I think also, you know, there's a lot of investment goes into the networks that are already in the ground and the business plans and the services that are already out there. And, you know, a focus on how companies are getting a return on their existing investments and a returning on their existing strategies. These are all the kind of things that we're going to be talking about during that event. So obviously, you know, we would invite anybody, any company to come and talk to us about that. But, you know, the video platform that we have, we are able to differentiate it because it's run by people who used to work in the TV industry, and so they know how to put a remote broadcasting you know, package together and make it work at high quality. You know, we're using Zoom at the moment, but you know, Zoom I think is almost a last resort, I think, for high quality digital presentations. So fortunately, I joined Telecom TV in March, and the team had already spent 8 years developing the smart studio system using these folks from the TV industry. And that's why we had such a good year last year, because it was a quality product where, you know, a lot of companies were using Zoom to try and catch up with what they wanted to do. We had a very high quality product, and obviously we'll continue that in 2021. So we're developing new things around that, and we have something you know, coming up, which is a very much a very quick deep dive for companies to be able to present in 15 minutes what their company or product strategies are for the market. And it's that kind of thing that we're offering to companies that, you know, at least want to get some messaging out to market, get something that they can use. Because the important thing about video, as well as I think, you know, video has been around for 20 plus years in the B2B market, but a lot of companies still haven't figured out just how powerful and useful it can be. Because you shoot a video once, it goes out on multiple channels, but those videos can then be used as sales tools and by marketing teams to take out and start engagement and start conversations with existing or potential customers. So I think there's a lot of leverage to be had out of quality video still in this industry, and obviously, you know, that's what we're here to offer. But you know, that's very much that's kind of on the sponsorship side. What I'm also driving as well is a way to get editorial. You know, we're driving our editorial agenda, but we can only do that with the help of the industry. Telecom TV has an editorial team of two and a half at most, so it's a very small team. So we specifically obviously want to engage and talk with the network operators and service providers and the hyperscalers, which we've been able to do in 2020. But you know, they have messages and stories and new strategies that they want to get out to market. And we are always happy to be talking to those companies and getting on a video, having a video conversation with them, or any other kind of conversation to get those kind of you know, strategies and stories and plans out to market. Because of course that is what drives then, you know, that's the kind of useful information I'm talking about. If I'm talking to Diego Tenori at Vodafone and he's explaining how Vodafone is going to deploy Open RAN in the market, that is absolutely essential information for the industry, but the kind of thing he might have presented on stage at the TIP Summit or Mobile World Congress. But it's absolutely vital he gets that to market now, not in 6 months' time. And those are the kind of conversations that we're brokering and getting to market. So obviously, the more network operators and service providers that we can talk to and that want to talk to us to get their strategies out to market, where obviously we are always open 24/7 for those kind of conversations.
Great to hear. Thanks very much, Ray. I think everyone will find that really useful. So we're now going to be opening up a discussion for a Q&A with the audience. So I think rather than opening up the audio to everyone at once, can you please raise your hands? There should be a button in the middle of your screen if you've got a question for Ray, and then I'll give you audio access once you've raised your hand to ask your question. So Sarah, I will start off with yourself.
Thanks, Paul. Hi, Ray. My name's Sarah. I'm from a company called Pure Li-Fi. And one of my questions is, we deal with a lot of customers who don't like to talk about our work with them because it's either sort of future innovation or about security. Sure. So case studies and sometimes customer endorsements are difficult for us to get in numbers. So, you know, we share things like demos and product specs and thought leadership pieces, but I was wondering, have you seen any interesting ways that companies have engaged the media that deal with my type of
Yeah, absolutely. And rather than explain it here, I'd be happy to send you an example. I think, you know, Qualcomm, obviously, you know, it's a very large company, but you know, they are a very technology, R&D and product strategy heavy company, and they did a great presentation a couple of months ago just with two of their technologists presenting about their product strategies, how they developed them, why they had developed them, and using slides, but also talking to camera. And it was a very engaging format, and it got a lot of information across in a very clear and concise way. And these were new products that they were just bringing to market, so they didn't have that use case. So if you want to reach out to me on LinkedIn, I'd be happy to share a link to that example to show how that can be overcome. And obviously, you know, when I use that example, I'm very aware that it's incredibly difficult a lot of the time to get clearance from customers to use their names or to use their examples. And I totally appreciate that. But wherever possible, I would absolutely encourage the use of it. But I think, like I said earlier, you know, I think if there is something, if any company is doing something that moves the needle, moves things on in the industry and provides the next step on the evolution of a technology roadmap, people will always be interested in that, and they're very interested in consuming it in their own time rather than you know, in an on-demand fashion. And I think, you know, we've definitely noticed that in the past year.
Great.
I hope
Thanks, sir.
Thank you, Sarah.
Thanks, Sarah. Any other questions at all? Simon, please go ahead.
All right, Simon from Vodafone. Hope you're well.
Hi,
Bit of an abstract question, this, but you were talking about Mobile World Congress in June, and that was very useful. Thank you. Have you got any views on Mobile World Congress next month in Shanghai and how the industry is going to be looking at that?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question, because I mentioned that yesterday to a colleague and said, I'm pretty sure that's going ahead. But the point I made to my colleague is that I think, you know, that show's been going on for quite a long time. But even I think the last time it was held, it was still more than 90% of the people that attended that show and presented at that show in terms of having a booth on the show floor, I think were from China. And I think the GSMA, by its own admission, had struggled to make it much more of a regional show. So I did actually make a note to go and check out how that was happening and what kind of scale. But I think because it was largely, and of course, you know, China is a massive market in itself, and is very worthy of having its own show. And I think that's how that MWC Asia ended up being a very China-focused and China-specific show. But also, of course, you know, companies wanted to come in from around the world and pitch to the Chinese operators as well and Chinese partners. Quite how that part will play out. But I think obviously China has is a bit more settled and is a little bit less tumultuous than the rest of the world. So I'm sure that show will go ahead, but I'm sure it'll be probably more. It'll probably more have a greater, you know, Chinese companies talking to other Chinese companies more than it did before. I don't know if they have much of a digital element to that show. I need to check that out myself. But I hope it does go ahead, you know, because obviously that would be very useful for that very large market. And I think, you know, I think you just triggered a point in my head, just to make a point. I think the one thing that the whole industry is missing, and of course, which cannot be replicated, is that person-to-person meeting, which is impossible. It really is impossible to replicate in any other fashion. I think that's what everybody is looking forward to getting back to. And you know, I know that that this isn't the right time or place to be doing it, but I would very much like to hear as well from companies on this call about how they have found the lack of that person-to-person interaction, and how that has impacted their strategies, and whether that's even impacted their marketing plans or businesses even in the interim, before we can get back to some kind of normality. But that's what everybody's missing, I think, is that interaction and that introduction to people that you'd never met before, which is absolutely critical to every industry, of course.
Brilliant. I think we have a few questions as well, Ray, on the chat function. So I'm going to kick off with one from Rudolph. So he says, we've seen how COVID-19 has exposed the digital divide in Western Europe with impacts on children's education. Are there any telecoms trends or advances in 2021 that could narrow the digital divide for low-income families who do not have the appropriate remote learning infrastructure for their children?
Well, I think this is something that that the industry is working on for sure, and I think it'll be very interesting to see what comes out of CES this week in terms of low-cost devices that can be economically distributed to the people that need it the most. But I would have to say that ultimately, and I have heard this from people in the industry as well, that so much of the impact on those on whether communication services and the tools that enable that, whether they can close that digital divide, comes down so much to regulation and government funding. But I think we are seeing movement on that as well. But obviously the network operators have a role to play in that as well, in zero rating data, which has been happening, providing free Wi-Fi or broadband services to specific sections of communities. And obviously we would hope to see that continue through 2021. But I think this is a chance for this industry to help decision makers in government and regulatory bodies to better understand the machinations of this industry and to understand how important it is to have robust communications networks as much as it is to have robust road networks, because that is what is going to enable economies to recover. And I think that we've seen countries where efficient regulation has had an incredible impact on broadband investments and infrastructure. And I'm thinking in Europe specifically of Spain here, where regulation has allowed network sharing. And that has made an enormous impact to the broadband population coverage with only in the past 4 years in a way it wouldn't have otherwise. So I think if there's a way for companies on this call today and other companies in the industry to the industry bodies that they are members of, like the GSMA and others, to be able to lobby governments and other bodies that can enable the regulations that would help to close these digital divides, then obviously that would be a step forward. I think we're a little bit way off on seeing things like low-cost satellite communications making a massive impact within the next couple of years, but I think that could be something that we'll all be talking about a lot more in maybe 4 to 5 years, when the low Earth orbit networks like Starlink begin to have global coverage and start to have a real impact on the industry and be able to reach the far-flung areas and act as emergency backup to the fixed and mobile networks as well.
Right, thank you, Ray. Thank you, Rudolph. Carl and Williams would like to hear your thoughts about digital transformation and where CSPs are with their move to kind of truly monetize 5G. So she asked, what do you see as the biggest challenge and barrier today to accelerate the digital transformation process? For example, cultural implementation of cloud, AI security, or perhaps more on the commercial side of how to enter new markets or develop new services?
Yeah. So I think that, and I banged on about this for years when I was at Light Reading as well, is that 5G isn't really about smartphones and radio access networks per se. 5G is another way of talking about an entire transformation of communications networks and platforms, and pouring hundreds of billions of dollars into new radio access networks and developing new end user devices is complete waste of time unless you have the essentially what is a telco cloud infrastructure to back it up. But I think we are going to start to see a greater move towards that in 2021, because the 5G core technology that is now coming to market, the standalone core platforms, these are cloud native platforms that will, that will reside on, IT platforms, and that could be those could be cloud platforms that are run by the operators, or also by third parties like the hyperscalers. We've seen Telefónica Germany commit to AWS as its partner to run its 5G core. And I think as we see 5G core platforms deployed, so we will see a greater use of cloud platforms by the communication service providers, and that in itself will start to impact the way that the operations teams within those organizations are able to behave. Only then will 5G actually start to make an impact on differentiated services beyond, and this is what I was talking about earlier, how we're starting to see talk about telco edge or edge computing services starting to come to market. That's a first step, but the real potential of those services can only come if that behind that is a true cloud platform that is more automated, and where the systems running it as much as possible are automated, but also are run by teams that are working in a completely different way to where they are now. And I think that it's that last bit that is the major challenge for all the network operators, to shift their teams, to change the skill sets and the ways of working into, what's referred to as DevOps, which is completely different from the way that network operations centers are run at the moment. And I think that is the kind of pain that the operators are going through right now, but it is going to be worth it. But without going through that pain, all that time and effort put into and investment into 5G is not going to be worth very much. And the promises of 5G being able to transform enterprises and bring new ways of working in manufacturing and all these other vertical sectors will not happen. So the absolutely critical part of 5G actually is nothing to do with what is generally referred to or thought of as 5G. It's all about the introduction of these telco cloud platforms, because that will, and ultimately, of course, that is what will enable Open RAN as well, and all of the other disaggregated and open technologies as well. So this is the critical point for the telecom industry now. And it's all about whether the telecom operators, how much they build that themselves, or they partner with third parties like AWS, Azure, Google Cloud, Alibaba, and more.
Wonderful, thanks, Ray. Shelley asks, what do you think about the telecoms industry's commitment to transitioning to renewable energy and combating climate change? Is it enough? And how will the move to 5G and the additional power required for those networks impact climate change?
Yeah, well, I think that is a real tightrope for the industry, because as much as the industry can talk about, that a 5G site might be more energy efficient than a 4G or a 3G site, there's going to be 10 or 100 times more of those sites, and therefore the energy use is going to go up. And this is why I said, it's incredibly important to tease out and find and bring to market and bring to light the stories and the efforts that are underway in enabling this industry to get where it needs to be with its more distributed and denser networks, without adding to the pressures of carbon usage and climate change. And I think it's absolutely possible. And I think we've seen an example, in fact, of that today. And I would recommend going to Telecom TV after this and checking out our What's Up With item, because there's an item in there about a network operator in Iceland that is using completely renewable energy to run all of the emergency network services in Reykjavik and more on a completely carbon neutral basis. Now, obviously, Iceland is a very particular country with a very particular climate where it's easier to build a naturally cooled data center. But I think it's the kind of technology developments that happen in countries that in the northern, very northern hemisphere. I think it's the developments there, I think, will impact and find their ways into other territories and into other markets. And I think, you know, this is so important. Every single CTO I talk to at a telco absolutely has this power efficiency and energy consumption bullet point at the top of their to-do list, you know, in terms of addressing it. It's absolutely vital, and it's vital not only from, you know, not making the world a hotter place, but it's also vital because investors, shareholders want to be seen to be investing and want to invest in companies that are not making this world a hotter place. So, you know, it's being driven as well by shareholders and the capital markets, as well as by the need to not heat the world beyond where it needs to go. So, you know, it sounds so boring. Let's talk about energy efficiency, but it's absolutely critical. And I want to hear every single power consumption, you know, reduced power consumption and energy efficiency story I can hear in this industry this year. So
thank you. Thanks, Ray. And interestingly, Shelley Zagari, who asked that question, actually works for Gencell, the company that you wrote the article about earlier today. So it's a small world. And well, she made an interesting point that sustainability isn't actually on the agenda for Mobile World Congress this year, and it was last year. Yeah, so that's quite a shocking fact. Brilliant.
Yeah. That's a story.
Yeah, indeed. I think we've I hope I haven't missed anyone. If I have, please raise your hand using the raise your hand function, and I can ask your question. But I think I've worked through every question from what I can see. So final chance, unless there's any more questions. I think we'll leave it there.
Have we covered all the ones in the Q&A list?
From what I can see.
Okay.
Yeah, I think we're all done. So thank you, everyone.
My friend Ronnie Haroldsvik has put a very pertinent question in the industry.
Yes, I missed that. So how was journalism in the last century?
Yes, Ronnie, I'll tell you about that when we meet in 2030. Yeah.
Brilliant. Well, Ray, I imagine your LinkedIn is going to be inundated with connection requests after this discussion. So people might have some follow-up questions for you, but we really appreciate your time. You know, if you've got any further questions for Ray, please do drop him a note. If you've got any questions for Babel, of course, please do get in contact with myself. You should all have my details, and I'll follow up with you with this link afterwards as well. So Ray, thank you ever so much for your time. It's been really insightful.
My pleasure. And like I said, please do reach out. You know, if you've got my email, by all means, send me an email, but please use LinkedIn and let's connect on LinkedIn. I'm happy to have further discussions and answer any further questions, you know, after this about what Telecom TV is doing, or to discuss, you know, how we can, you know, start a conversation if we're not already having one. About what you're doing in the industry. So, you know, I'd like to thank Babel for the opportunity to be able to chat to people today, and I look forward to further discussions.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.